How do we classify our vegetables? I bet each one of you has a different way of doing this and a different way of sorting and describing what you're eating. Today we're going to talk more about all of the different ways that we talk about our vegetables and learn a little bit of the terminology. We have different definitions for different purposes. So if we are talking horticulture, plant science, botany, we're going to classify our vegetables in a botanical way. If we are shopping at the grocery store and looking at different types of things to eat, we may classify them by what portion of the plant we're eating. You can also classify vegetables by when they grow. Do they grow in the spring? Do they grow in the summer? Do they grow in the fall? So their season of growth is one of the ways that we classify our vegetable plants. We can also classify by life cycle. Are they annuals? Are they perennials? And in addition, we can classify them in terms of the market, whether or not they're called a fruit or a vegetable or in what way we eat them. There are many plant families, many, but there are only a few plant families that we typically get our vegetable crops from. In the big picture of the world, however, there there are people who eat plants in hundreds of different families. We're going to focus on six plant families that comprise the bulk of what we eat here in the United States. The Brassicaceae, the Solanaceae, the Cucurbitaceae, the Apiaceae, the Asteraceae, and the Fabaceae. And as you can see, all of them have the ACA ending, which indicates that that is the family name. So whenever you see that ending on any plant name, that indicates that it is a plant family. The Brassicaceae family is a very important plant family for those of us who like to eat and grow vegetables. There are just a huge number of types and varieties of vegetables found in this family. And one of the more interesting things about them is that they're all edible and all parts are edible. So it's a very fun family to look at. One of their common characteristics among all of the species found in the Brassicaceae family is the flower. The flower has four distinct petals. They're not always yellow, sometimes they're white, but because of the four petal structure, that is why this family was once called the Cruciferae family and is known now as the crucifer crops. These plants are also known as the cole crops, and that comes from the German word for cabbage or stem, which is what cabbage is, like a compressed stem with all of the leaves. And so cole crops is another common name for the plants within this family. In addition, you will hear them referred to as the brassicas or the mustards or the cabbage family, the broccoli family. And all of that is correct because all of the plants in this family are very closely related and have some very similar characteristics. In the Brassicaceae family, all of the parts for each of these species are edible, but there are some typical parts that we eat. So for example, cabbage, kale, bok choy, mustard greens, collard greens, these are leaf tissue that we're eating. When we eat a radish or turnip or a rutabaga, we're eating root tissue. When you're eating kohlrabi, it's actually stem tissue, but sometimes people will eat the petioles and the leaves of kohlrabi as well. Cauliflower is very unique and a special mutation all unto itself, and the part that we eat in cauliflower is called a curd, and it's sort of like floral tissue, but not exactly. If you've ever let cauliflower go to flower, you realize that the curd separates and the floral structure comes up um, between the pieces of the curd. Brussels sprout is an axillary bud, so it's sort of like leaf tissue, but not exactly. It is a bud that occurs in the axils of the mature plant. And then seeds or oil come from the brassica seeds, canola oil, mustard seeds. Those two plants we typically will eat either the seeds or the pressed oil. And then flowers and buds, we usually think of broccoli when we think about eating flowers. The Solanaceae plant family is a very important and popular plant family for vegetables. Even gardeners who say they don't grow vegetables and don't want anything to do with a vegetable garden will often be growing a tomato or a pepper or both in a container, or even in their flower bed they might be growing a tomato. So it's a pretty popular plant family. It includes the peppers, all of the peppers, hot and sweet, tomatoes, tomatillos, eggplant, and potatoes. These are the ones that we think of as our edible crops, but in this particular family, there are many plants that are not edible. And this also goes under the name of the nightshade family, so that gives you an indication of the potential problem with some of the plants in this family. It also includes such things as tobacco, the deadly nightshades, and petunia. These are sometimes called the solanaceous crops, or they're just simply called the tomato family. We eat both the mature and immature fruits in this family, but not typically anything else. The foliage, the stems, the roots are not typically eaten. The Irish potato, which is sort of a misnomer since the potato is not truly from Ireland. It was exported to Ireland from South America. So the potato is all of the plants in the Solanaceae family are true American natives. The potato is an underground tuber, which is really stem tissue, and that's the part that we will eat in the Solanaceae family. If you look at the flower of the potato plant, you will notice that it looks very similar to the flower that we see on the tomato, the pepper, the eggplant, as well as some of the deadlier species in this family have a very similar flower structure. In the Solanaceae family, we have many plants that are very, very poisonous. One of them, climbing nightshade, is a common native plant found in many parts of Wisconsin. This plant can be found in urban areas as well as rural areas, and it can be quite attractive to kids or even adults who don't know any better. These plants often will have a purple flower that looks very much like a tomato flower or an eggplant or a pepper, and the fruit will be produced in clusters, much like a cherry tomato. The fruit, when it's green, is incredibly poisonous to the point of having the ability to kill a small child. As it ripens, it becomes less toxic. So, in this family, typically the fruit is edible, but in this particular case, the fruit is very poisonous. The flowers in the Solanaceae family have some distinct characteristics and similarities. Often the petals will be fused or partially fused. You typically will have five petals, a very tight central stamen and pistil arrangement, but they come in many different colors. So they can be white, pale pink, dark purple, or yellow. The Cucurbitaceae family is another important family for vegetable growers, and typically a vegetable garden will have several different species in this family. This is also called the cucurbit family or the cucumber family, the pumpkin family, and it does include all of the squash, cucumbers, all of the melons, gourds, pumpkins. All of these things are found within this family. We typically will eat the fruit of this family, either immature or mature, depending on what it is, and sometimes the flowers as well. So the flowers are edible, and many times squash blossoms will be used either in salads or sautéed. There are several different genera within this family, including Cucurbita, Citrullus, and Cucumis, and this becomes important if you are interested in growing multiple types in your vegetable garden and have plans for collecting seed. Many times when gardeners are growing a number of different types of squash or cucumbers, melons in their garden, they are very concerned about whether or not they're going to get cross-pollination and if it's going to affect their production. So if you're not collecting seed, you don't have to worry about this at all. But if you are going to do seed selection at the end of the year, you need to understand that some of these different types of plants can cross. So pumpkin and squash can cross, and squash, of course, can cross. But some things can't cross. So squash and cucumber can't cross. In addition, what you need to understand is that the fruit production is is not based on what is in the seed. It's just based on the mother plant and the actual act of pollination and fertilization. So if you're growing a yellow squash, your fruit is going to be yellow squash. If you're growing a cucumber, your fruit is going to be cucumber. You're not going to get a cross between two different species and have it affect the fruit. So the only time you need to be careful is if you are doing seed selection. The Apiaceae family, or the carrot family, includes things like parsley and cilantro, also parsnip, wild parsnip, and of course Queen Anne's lace, which is really just another name for carrot. It's the wild form of carrot. The taproot in these families is edible, of course, with the carrot, and sometimes we will eat the leaves, as with parsley and cilantro. But not all leaves are edible, and not all plants are edible within this plant family. So we need to be very careful about knowing what we're growing and harvesting the appropriate part. The Apiaceae family also includes quite a few species that are poisonous, so it's a good idea to know what it is you're growing and what part you're harvesting. And if you're out in the wild and see a plant that looks like parsley or looks like carrot or even Queen Anne's lace, it might be poison hemlock, it might be cow parsnip, it might be wild parsnip, and all of these are considered very poisonous plants and can cause a very extreme dermatitis if you get in contact with their sap. The Fabaceae family is the bean family, used to be called the Leguminosae family, and so sometimes you will still hear this family referred to as the legumes. It is the family that contains all the peas and beans, including peanut, fava bean, English pea, as well as our general snap bean. There are many plants in this family that are completely edible. Typically, we eat the fruit or the seed, but the flowers and the new shoots of the vines are also edible, and in many cultures, that is the part that is most prominently eaten. The Asteraceae family is not one that we typically think of as being an edible plant family because many times we think of asters, marigolds, coneflowers, sunflowers, zinnias, and dandelions, but all of these are actually edible. The plant that we most often grow, though, in the Asteraceae family for consumption is lettuce. And if you were to let lettuce mature and go to flower and seed, it's very easy to see from the flower structure that lettuce is definitely an aster. And it can make quite a beautiful plant even in your ornamental garden. Also in the Asteraceae family are Jerusalem artichoke and all of the different types of lettuce. So the leaf lettuces, the head lettuces, and then romaine lettuce. But the part that we most often eat is the leaf tissue, but the flower tissue in many of these plants is also edible. The Asteraceae family also includes such plants as chicory, which we often see blooming on the side of the road. And as soon as those little blue blossoms start appearing, you should start looking out for the Japanese beetle to emerge in your garden. Chicory is an edible plant from top to bottom. The root is roasted and used as a coffee substitute, and the leaves of a chicory-like plant are used for endive. So endive and chicory are very closely related, but the entire chicory plant is edible and can be eaten much like endive is eaten. We have many different definitions and classifications for vegetables depending on how we're using our vegetable crops. And we've talked a little bit about the botanical classification and some about the edible portion, looking at whether or not we're eating the roots or the stems or the leaves. We'll talk more about the season of growth and the life cycle. So, how do you classify vegetables by life cycle? Classification by life cycle is divided into two major groups, and most of our vegetable crops end up in the annual classification, much like the okra shown here. And what that means is that you can plant seed, and by the end of the season, you will have a fruit producing a mature seed. So, seed to seed production in a single season is what makes an annual plant an annual. There are several types of perennials within the vegetable group. Rhubarb is a great example of that. And if you plant rhubarb, a rhubarb crown, and cultivate it nicely, you can have rhubarb pretty much forever. Asparagus is the same way. Asparagus beds, if they are maintained, typically will last 20 to 30 years, but in some cases they can last much longer. So a perennial plant is one that you just plant one time and you just take care of it and it will continue to come back year after year.